Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. So today we're looking at something a little bit meta and honestly absolutely fascinating. We are unpacking the blueprint for a viral documentary about literally one of the most unbelievable geopolitical shifts in human history. We're basically reverse engineering a script rubric that tells the story of a massive nation that, well, vanished overnight. By analyzing this source material, we're going to see exactly how a masterclass in narrative structure breaks down the dissolution of a global superpower. And more importantly, we're going to uncover the specific psychological storytelling techniques this blueprint uses to keep us just completely glued to the narrative right from the very first word.
Notice how the blueprint doesn't kick things off with some dry, boring history lesson. Instead, it hits us with a super surreal, jarring question to build immediate suspense in like the first 10 seconds. What if you woke up tomorrow in a completely different country without ever leaving your bed? I mean, it's a profoundly unsettling thought, right? You go to sleep in your own room, in your own house, and when the sun comes up, the government has changed, the borders have shifted, and the very identity of the ground beneath your home has been fundamentally rewritten. The blueprint deliberately holds back the historical topic at first. It just wants to grab us with this unimaginable scenario, kind of forcing us to step into the shoes of someone experiencing a total reality shift. It makes us relentlessly curious to figure out how something like that could even happen.
But here is the truly mind-blowing part. This wasn't some abstract dystopian fiction. The source reveals that millions of people actually lived this exact phenomenon. Just imagine that for a second. Millions of everyday citizens, teachers, factory workers, doctors, students, they went to sleep living in one nation, under one flag, and woke up the next morning in an entirely different reality. They didn't pack their bags, they didn't board a train, they didn't take a single step outside their front doors. The ground literally shifted beneath them politically. Starting the narrative right here instantly grounds this massive historical event in incredibly intimate human terms.
And then, boom, the blueprint finally drops the grand historical reveal: the collapse of the Soviet Union. Honestly, it's a total masterclass in pacing. By capturing us on that human level first, the script makes sure that when it finally zooms out to the macro geopolitics, we're already totally invested. We aren't just hearing about the end of a political entity, we're hearing the story of the country that disappeared overnight. The source material brilliantly builds up this mountain of curiosity, making the revelation of this massive historical event feel super weighty and personal right out of the gate. To really grasp the sheer magnitude of this collapse, the blueprint knows we have to understand exactly what was lost, and it actively avoids all that dense, complicated political jargon that might just alienate people. Instead, it gives us a really clean, universally understood definition of a superpower. We're talking about a nation with a dominant global position, able to exert immense influence and project its power worldwide. Think about it: an entity that commanded vast nuclear arsenals, spearheaded space exploration, and heavily influenced global politics for decades. The narrative wants to make absolutely sure we recognize just how mighty, influential, and seemingly permanent this entity was before it dives into how the whole thing came crashing down. The sheer scale of this event is really best understood through stark contrast. We go from a single monolithic global superpower dominating a huge chunk of the map to 15 fractured, independent countries that suddenly took its place. Just think about the shock value of that. A massive, unified bloc that basically defined global relations for nearly half a century suddenly shattered like a piece of glass into all these distinct puzzle pieces. By placing these two realities side by side, the blueprint sets this incredibly dramatic stage for the core narrative, visually highlighting the absolute sheer volume of this geopolitical earthquake.
So now that we're thoroughly hooked and we really understand the stakes, the blueprint seamlessly shifts into the story phase by asking the one question that is naturally on everyone's mind. Why did the Union collapse? I mean, how does a behemoth with such immense power, resources, and global influence just fall apart? The narrative structure here is designed to take us from a state of awe right into a state of inquiry. It effortlessly transitions us from the emotional shock of that opening hook directly into the actual mechanics and historical drivers of the collapse. To answer that massive question, the source material breaks down the causes into three specific interlocking pillars, and it keeps the language remarkably clear and accessible. First, an economic crisis that deeply weakened the state's foundation. The system was really struggling to keep up with global markets, which led to stagnation and massive shortages affecting the daily lives of everyday citizens. Second, political reforms. While these were intended to modernize and open up the system, they inadvertently destabilized a very, very rigid structure. Actually, it was a lot like opening the valve on a highly pressurized tank. And third, surging independence movements.
As that central grip loosened, distinct republics within the Union began demanding their own sovereignty, prioritizing their local identities over the centralized state. The script neutrally reports these three intersecting forces, the economy, politics, and local independence, as the primary catalysts that ultimately brought the giant down.
Now notice the subtle brilliance of the script here. Instead of relying on dry, uninspired stage directions, it weaves the visual action right into the dialogue itself with the phrase, "the map suddenly splits." It perfectly ties the spoken word to what's graphically happening. As the narrator explains how the breakdown of the economy, the political structure, and the rise of those independence movements took hold, the narrative is literally redrawing the globe in real time. It's such a dynamic storytelling technique. It maximizes the emotional punch, ensuring the pacing is perfectly tied to that feeling of a world literally fracturing apart. While the blueprint generally does a great job avoiding bogging us down with endless textbook dates so it can keep the momentum high, it does intentionally anchor the narrative on one undeniable focal point: December 1991. This is the definitive moment the Soviet Union officially dissolved. By restricting the historical timeline to just this one crucial month, the source ensures the narrative stays incredibly punchy. It kind of brings to mind the cold, historic atmosphere of that winter, perfectly framing the final moments of a global giant. It focuses all our attention right on the climax of the story, without losing us in a maze of historical trivia.
And that brings us to a really critical number in our explainer: 15. One moment, the world is looking at a single, unified nation spanning continents and I don't even know how many time zones. The very next moment, that massive contiguous landmass fragmented into exactly 15 distinct sovereign entities. It's a number that represents one of the most sudden and expansive redrawings of the world map in modern history. The blueprint heavily emphasizes this figure to really solidify the sheer scale of the fragmentation. From there, the blueprint brings the abstraction completely down to reality by explicitly naming these newly emerged nations. We see the birth of the modern borders for Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and the Baltic states. Mentioning these specific countries really grounds the geopolitical shockwave. It highlights how the shattering of this one massive superpower birthed distinct, independent nations that just immediately began altering the global balance of power, practically overnight. It transforms a conceptual collapse into tangible, recognizable modern geography that we know today. To make absolutely sure the sheer gravity of this event doesn't somehow get lost in all the macro geopolitics, the blueprint circles right back to its brilliant opening hook. It forces us to dwell once more on that incredibly profound human element, repeating the concept that millions of people woke up living in a completely different country without ever moving. It's just a beautifully crafted bookend to the narrative. It ensures we truly internalize the bizarre, instantaneous reality of this map change for the everyday citizens whose lives, passports, and national identities were completely transformed in the blink of an eye. As the narrative starts to wrap up, the blueprint delivers its core thematic takeaway: the breathtaking speed of history. It's a really profound reflection on how rapidly global history and physical borders can shift. We often look at world maps as if they're these permanent, unchangeable paintings drawn in permanent ink. But this script structure powerfully reminds us that the map is a dynamic, sometimes really fragile construct. It's drawn in pencil, and the borders that define our world can literally be erased and rewritten in a matter of days.
Finally, the blueprint leaves the audience echoing with one last chilling thought: how quickly could history change tomorrow? It is an absolute masterclass in leaving the viewer wanting more, planting a little seed of curiosity about the future based on the shocks of the past. It's a thought that definitely lingers long after the map settles. Well, if you found this breakdown of the documentary script blueprint as captivating as I did, make sure to subscribe and follow along for more map history explainers. Thanks so much for learning with me today.